It's been about 6 months now since we did the last Q&A, about a year since we launched the channel as a whole. I thought that would be a relatively good point to offer another Q&A. So I put out an appeal last week on the YouTube community page, and we've had a couple of questions in. So this video is just me answering them in an effort to let you know where we are and where we're going to be going from here. So here we go. First up, I've been asked a couple of times, so it's probably best if we address the elephant in the room. The Patreon, whatever you call it, the subscriber competition for an episode. The winner of that was a script called Bez. Bez is a Russian demon, and that script saw a German army chaplain being the only survivor of a massacre, being inhabited by that demon, and then fighting against a Russian partisan unit. Given what's going on in Ukraine at the moment, I took the decision not to publish that video. I'm not massively comfortable publishing anything that might glorify the Russian army or Russian military history while things are the way they are. So that script has been shelved. It's not cancelled, it's shelved until all this blows over, as are a couple of other scripts that involved Russian characters and Russian units. It's not some massive woke political ideology. It's more a case of the fact that myself and Sean have put a lot of effort into the channel to get it where it is. I don't really want to run the risk that somebody might take exception to a Russian themed video, put a complaint in, and have to go to a lengthy process of fighting with YouTube to get the channel monetized or resurrected or whatever. So it's my decision just to pause that. It is my intention to run that script. Sean in particular quite likes it and is quite eager to illustrate it. So hopefully, once everything in Europe sorts itself out, that is an episode that will be coming in the future, but not for the time being. I guess if I have to lay the blame, tribute, blame, I don't know. If I have to pin it down to anywhere as to why I'm slightly obsessed about military history and World War II, then that would be with both my grandfathers. My paternal grandfather, Jack, who's pictured here now, served in World War II. He was in the RAF. He was captured at Tobruk and spent a lot of the conflict in a prisoner of war camp. It is my intention at some point in the future, probably to do a video on his experiences. But out of respect for him and what he had gone through, I was interested in the conflict in the RAF at an early age. Alongside that, my maternal grandfather, Matthew, was too young to join the army during World War II. He was a doctor, a GP, and joined the Territorial Army after the war. He was very, very interested, I suppose, like most of his generation who didn't go to war, in what happened. And when I used to visit him at his house, he had a full library of military history books that I would work through. And on the side, he was also quite interested in the paranormal. So on one shelf, you had tons of military history books, and then on another, you had books on UFOs and ghosts. And I suppose from the age of 5, 6 onwards, up until my teenage years, I was just incessantly reading about military history and about the paranormal. So I suppose I was on the path then, really. It's always been World War II. I haven't been as drawn to other conflicts as much, which is why it was my decision to base the channel in World War II. But as you've probably seen over the course of the year, and with the answers to some of the other questions, what we've created now is starting to expand out beyond that into other conflicts. I wouldn't describe it as a eureka moment, largely because I'm horrifically self-critical and never really happy with what I've created anyway. If there's a benchmark I work towards, it's that would I find it convincing? Would I find it scary? And if I can convince myself while I'm writing, then that should usually be good enough to convince other people. In terms of figuring out what to put where and when, I have spent a long time writing for bedtime stories and researching various ghosts, cryptids, UFOs, paranormal aspects. Alongside that, I've spent a lifetime reading about certain battles and certain conflicts during World War II, which perhaps are not as well known as the major ones. And it just comes down to matching those two up in a way that's convincing but not farcical. I tried to explain with the Morgan episode. I'll usually have a signature scene or an ending in my head, such as a jeep full of zombies crashing out the back of a glider in a Dutch dike, and then it's how I get to that point, and I'll just try and match up, where if I had a Wendigo, Wendigos live in snow, where would I put them? Oh, the Battle of the Bulge, that had snow. How would I get it there? Well, it's a Native American belief. I put a Native American there. He generated it. Yeah, that could work. And if I can tick off all those boxes, that's where an episode will start. Um, Bizarrely, one I had yesterday, I was reading a book on the Kriegsmarine. There was a chapter on the unfinished German aircraft carrier Graf Zeppelin. It spent most of the war moored up off a port with a skeleton crew of 40 on it. All its guns been taken away and put elsewhere. So I just had the thought, well, what if that skeleton crew was keeping something on it rather than keeping people away from it? And what would work there? Would it be a monster? Would it be a ghost? Would it be something more occult? And that then forms the basis for an episode. And sometimes it's as simplistic as that. It needs to be just about believable, but also unbelievable at the same time, if that makes any sense. When I ask people to put forward questions, there's usually one question that makes me feel a little bit awkward and uncomfortable, and that I'll come across as a bit of a knob. And this is the one. How do I come up with the names? The idea behind the names is really, along with the trailers, to try and push the audience and to make them think a little bit. I try and pick words that are relevant to the story, but are relatively unused words, or I will find a Latin or a German or a foreign translation of the word. And hopefully, when the trailer drops, it should be just cryptic or confusing enough that it prompts someone to give it a Google and find out. So, in some cases, such as Morgan or Bok or Bez, it's the name of the entity, which I'll have picked because it's not that well known, so people will just Google that. In other cases, such as Ela, picked because the convoy is going through a gap in the air cover. So it's the Valley of Ela, David and Goliath. Or in Brook, which is just as simple as the German word for bridge, which is a bridge between the two realities. I will just hopefully create something whereby when people watch the visuals and the trailer and then see the word, they'll think, I wonder what that is. And they'll just start doing a little bit more research into it. That's the hopefully how it comes across. I don't want to come across that I'm just pretentious and like using big words because it's not really as simple as that. I am conscious that I've come in for a fair bit of criticism, feedback, whichever way you want to term it, that it is all quite Europe centric now and all quite British versus German. There are a number of Pacific themed stories. There's one set in a Japanese POW camp where there is a supernatural force linked to the prisoners who is killing the guards, which is kind of like a detective story. There's another one planned which is based around a Japanese unit trying to contend with an Aswang in a village that they have encountered. The scripts are there. In fact, the story that's been pushed in to replace Bez is one called Apex, and that is about a Japanese super soldier making landfall in North Carolina and having to contend with the local populace, and also, in addition to that, another supernatural threat too. So there are Japanese and Pacific episodes planned. At the same time, there's some Italian, Middle Eastern ones planned as well, and a couple set sort of Finland and Norway. Essentially, we are going to branch out of mainstream Europe, but one of the problems I have is that if a new script comes in and it looks entertaining and like it's going to build the channel, I'll run with it and then push another script back. But this year, yes, I make a pledge. We are going to start pushing out beyond Britain, France, and Germany to pastures new. Nice to see a Norwegian correspondent here. There are a couple of scripts set in Norway that we're going to get around to, so hopefully those will be pleasing and satisfying. You've probably got the sense with the short stories that have been woven in now between the episodes that we are going to head more and more out into non 20th century conflicts. When you've got a bad guy like Lucius, examining his backstory automatically pushes you back even further than that, so that there's at least one Roman script planned. And in terms of the Wars of Faith, the trailer for the Morgan short Oubliette will be dropping shortly. This is some of the artwork from it, and as you can see, that is based around the 1600s and the Spanish army that was defeated in the Anglo-Spanish War, which is going on in Europe at the time. At the moment, there aren't many of those stories planned because that's not my skill set. I'd have to do a fair bit of research to make it convincing. Morgan did open that because I had listed that there were protagonists from all through history in there. So, yes, provisionally, we will possibly work up to doing episodes that are outside World War II, but it might take a little bit longer to do them because I'll have to familiarise myself with the material first and make sure it's right before it goes out. I think so would probably be the best answer for this question. There is at least another episode planned featuring Johnny Grey Wolf, so that will certainly see some Native American representation in it. And I think I covered it in the Bach production video, there are so many Native American monsters and cryptids and demons that are worthy of a bedtime stories episode or unclassified encounter episode that I would be keen to use them. In particular, there's a sort of a demonic witch hag which I'd quite like to see facing off against somebody. The only issue I will have is trying to make the scenario convincing. I don't want to get in a cycle whereby every episode consists of a ship grounding or a German sub sinking or a spy escaping and running off into the woods and then encountering a Native American threat. I'm fairly confident that we'll get a few more in there. And what I tend to do when I've got them is to reach out to people I know within that community who can help, who can make sure that they're representative of that community and that they're in a good spirit rather than just being all Hollywood and satirical and just making stuff up. So yes, there will be. I'm not in a position at the moment to say which ones or how we're going to get there. In a word, no, there aren't at the moment. It's an organisation that I'm aware of, and I think it is fertile ground for an episode. I guess I've not pursued that particular line so far, and I've tried to keep a bit of a distance between it because there've already been umpteen movies featuring German zombies or SS sorcerers or occult. It goes quite Hellboy, doesn't it? That said, I have started to point some of the future scripts towards one character, a sort of an eccentric German officer, um, with an interest in the occult and some of the ideas that he has in terms of desperate and last ditch attempts to stave off the Allies in the dying days of the war. I think he'll be a name dropped and a recurring shadowy figure initially in the stories before he comes into his own. And it is very much themed around him acting on his own as a bit of a rogue or as a bit of an unknown element that the German High Command leave to his own devices rather than an organised cult or division. There is a sort of rough idea that when the channel ends, it will end in South America after the war, and there'll be a cadre of escaped Germans there, and one of them will have been like a sort of mad scientist who creates clockwork soldiers. One will be an occultist who creates supernatural enemies, and you've got some of the products of those experiments going looking for them to stop them, with South American forces standing in the way. So there's going to be 2 or 3 German characters engineered and woven into the stories moving forward for that as a way of finishing off the channel further down the line. Afternoon, Elise. I don't know when people watch an episode, what work they think goes into it. I happen to think it all looks quite spit and sawdust. I don't know how professional it comes across. It certainly doesn't feel like it's in the same league as bedtime stories, where you have me writing it, Mike illustrating it, and then Rich editing, producing, putting the animation in, write the theme tune, sing the theme tune, and narrating it. I mean, I would love to be in a position where it can evolve to that stage, but it certainly isn't at the moment. What happens now is that I will write a script, or somebody will suggest some content to me, or Sean will come up with an idea, and I will write that out, aiming for 6,000 words for a full episode, which would translate to about 30-minute speech, or half that, say 3,000 words for a 15-minute script, broken down into 6 slides for a short, 12 slides for a full episode, and I will then construct a brief from that for Sean to work off, which will start off with a description of the slide that I want drawing, with any hints or tips and maybe a reference photo. And then after that, there'll be the body of text that slide will cover, broken down into sort of 4 or 5 line paragraphs across all the slides. And then I will email across to him. I massively trust his judgment, and particularly in the stories that he's come up with. Sometimes I won't send him a brief and I'll say, look, freestyle it, come with what you want. And you can tell in terms of his artwork that varies between the more pencil drawings he did for Malediction to some of the more colourful stuff that he's done since. And then he will go away and he will produce the slides in line with the brief that I've given him, and he will email them back to me after a week or 2. Once I have the art at hand, I've evolved a 3-week cycle now, whereby in week 1 I will put together a trailer with 2 of the slides and the title card. I'll then use iMovie on my iPad to put the artwork down, and to edit the movement into it. I will narrate over the top of that and edit that, and then I overlay the music after that, which is all free music or music there's a contribution, and I'll slow or speed that up accordingly and try and get the volume right. And then when that's done, I then upload it onto a Mac with a slightly better version of iMovie on there, and use that to put the subtitling on. which is what takes the most time and effort, if I'm honest. And then once that is all lined up, I'll upload that to YouTube so that it goes out to Patreon access first. And then at the same time, I'll put together a little bit of a 10-minute production video afterwards using stock photos or art from the episode and put that out, by which time, hopefully, Sean will have the next lot of artwork or Mikey through for the next episode. So it's not quite a one-man band, but I do the bulk of it. That said, I've had a couple of offers for narration come through, and particularly for American stories. I'd be more than happy to get somebody with an American accent, more convincing than mine, to narrate them. I've also had an offer for a script. Somebody in America at the moment is now working on a script for me, which sounds brilliant, and I'm hoping comes to fruition. And there is also somebody else who's done a little bit more art as well. And I think one of the reasons why the numbers in terms of subscribers is going up is because we've managed to hit a regular output. So to do that, it obviously just means that there need to be backups and reserves, so that if Sean has to take some time away, we can still put material out. That all sounds very boring while I'm saying it. I hope it doesn't come across as that, but essentially, it's just a lot of time in front of an iPad and a Mac at the moment. Hope that helps.